Conrad, United States Army, has evacuation of Dubai ended in complete failure. Death toll, too many.
Spec Ops The Line is one of my all-time favorite games. On the surface, it seemed like just another mindless, brown-tinted military shooter in an era flooded with games trying to rip off the latest Call of Duty, and its marketing didn't sell it as anything more than that, causing it to perform poorly at launch. However, those of us who did give it a chance would look back on it as one of the most memorable, symbolic, horrifying, and important games of the 2010s. Even after 12 years, this game is still talked about with more video essays and discussions than any other game I've seen, and while it was a sleeper hit at release, word of mouth would turn it into an undeniable cult classic. I've always wanted to talk about this game on the channel, but never found the appropriate time to do so. However, with the game being officially delisted, I feel it's now or never for me to share my thoughts on this game. Before we get started, I wanted to be clear that while I'll try to skip over the more impactful spoilers of the game, going in completely blind is the best way to play this game. So if you don't want any spoilers and are still curious about this game, I highly recommend you give it a try while you still can. With all that out of the way,
gentlemen, welcome to Dubai.
the game is set in an alternate version of Dubai after it was hit by a devastating sandstorm. The US Army was sent in to evacuate civilians, but when you lose contact with them, you and 2 other Delta Force operators are sent in to find out what's going on. And as far as the game's marketing goes, that's all we were told about this game. Most of the game's marketing just focused on the gameplay and flashy shootouts, which kinda made the game seem like another generic third-person shooter. In fact, they even released a free demo of the game that focused on its earlier missions, and this didn't really help matters, because judging Spec Ops by its earlier missions makes it seem like nothing more than another military shooter where you play as wisecracking American soldiers sent into a foreign country to save the day. And you gotta understand that during this time, with the success of games like Call of Duty, there was an insane boom of military shooters trying to get a piece of that pie. During the 2000s and 2010s, we saw countless military games, including Call of Duty, Battlefield, Medal of Honor, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, Call of Duty, Homefront, Brothers in Arms, Army of Two, SOCOM, Call of Duty, Operation Flashpoint, Sniper Elite, Sniper Ghost Warrior, Rogue Warrior, Call of Duty, Rising Storm, Soldiers of Fortune, MAG, Honor of Victory, Call of Duty, Heavy Fire Afghanistan, Conflicted Denied Ops, American Army, various military-themed sci-fi shooters, Call of Duty, and of course, 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. And when Spec Ops The Line's demo and trailers were compared to all these other games, a lot of people didn't see much reason to give it a chance. Despite having a solid critical reception, it underperformed. I do feel the demo especially hurt this game's pre-launch perception because the only thing those early levels showed off was the gameplay. Now, to be fair, the gameplay isn't necessarily bad. The controls usually felt responsive, shooting felt satisfying enough, enemies felt intense with their aggressive tactics and constant screaming for their lives, and they did have a few neat ideas, like issuing commands to your squad, as well as using sand and interactable environments to affect firefights. However, I felt those few unique ideas weren't fleshed out enough, and while not bad, the controls did feel dated as it played like your typical Gears of War clone, poking your head in and out of cover to take pot shots, awkward movement, and trying to move around cover, which felt kinda clunky at times. On top of that, just going off of what was shown in the marketing and the demo, you had a lot of those typical sections like a bullet time section, turret sections, defend the point from waves of enemies section, and a helicopter sequence. Now, from everything I've said thus far, you're probably thinking, if Spec Ops' gameplay wasn't that much different from any other shooter, how did this game stand out? And to that I say, that was the point of the marketing. Jaeger wanted us to think this was just going to be another Call of Duty or Gears of War clone. Now before you say this is hard copium, hear me out. They wanted us to go in with the same expectations we already had playing these games about righteous US soldiers fighting a clearly evil foreign enemy in a mindless roller coaster ride of adrenaline-filled action. And while the game starts off making you think that's how things are going to be, Jaeger quickly pulls the rug from under us and subverts our expectations. While this marketing tactic might have done more harm than good financially, it was probably necessary as it's hard to sell this game without giving away its true intent, to make you care about what's happening on screen. Now don't get me wrong, I actually liked this military era of games. This was around the time I was falling in love with gaming, and I can't deny I had a lot of fun with many of these games. The amount of fast-paced action and immersive large-scale set pieces in these games were just unmatched compared to anything else. That said, despite this era overstaying its welcome, a lot of these games did kinda play it safe. Besides a few games like maybe the Metal Gear Solid series, most of these games had a very black and white interpretation of its war subject, making the US out to be the objective good guys, having no care for collateral damage or civilians, and having you shoot up thousands of enemies without a care in the world because the game told you it was okay. And while there's by no means anything wrong with rooting for our troops who give their lives to defend this country, I do feel some games get carried away with all the action and explosions and forget what kind of subject matter they're adapting. Most military games usually feel like Rambo, with a few of them maybe feeling more like Saving Private Ryan. They might show some horrific actions, but usually through only the enemy's side. However, unlike most video games, many other forms of media weren't afraid to comment on the more grayer aspects of war or the military. From movies like Full Metal Jacket, Sicario, Platoon, and Apocalypse Now, to even novels like Heart of Darkness. Those last two in particular would be big inspiration for Spec Ops The Line, because Spec Ops The Line isn't beloved because of its gameplay, it's loved because of its amazing storytelling and how it manipulates and misleads the player.
We've been set up.
When you start the game, you think you're going to be that classic American hero sent in to save the day. However, the line starts to blur, no pun intended, as you realize there's a civil war going on between US Army soldiers who've gone rogue and have taken control of the city to preserve order, and the CIA who've convinced many of the populace to turn on the damned 33rd, but only so they can wipe out the army, cover up their takeover of Dubai, and avoid a more widespread conflict. And you find yourself in conflict with both of these sides, as it's hard to assume who's really the bad guy here, or if either of them are entirely bad at all.
Hey Bradley, you got any gum?
Here you go. Last piece.
I don't want to take your last piece, dude.
Take it. Stole it off of Benson anyway.
Ah, well, fuck that guy.
No kidding.
You know, with all the shit going on, I forget how beautiful this place can be.
I feel you.
You know, sometimes at night I'll just come out here and sit. Just listen to the wind.
Yeah. Reminds me of how the wind used to howl through the trees where I grew up. Kinda peaceful, actually.
Hard to believe there's any peace in a place like this, huh?
You gotta look for peace no matter where you are, man. Helps remind you what you're fighting for.
Yeah, true that. Anyway, thanks for the gum. I'm gonna go check upstairs.
In fact, Even though you and your squad entered this city with the intent to find civilians, you'll quickly realize a lot of what you're doing is only making the situation worse. As you go deeper, trying to survive, and start getting involved with this conflict, you aren't given a pat on the back for what you are doing like you would in most games. A lot of times, your plans backfire and make life for the citizens of Dubai much harder. But you keep pushing because you want to know what's going on and hope that everything will resolve itself by the end. As the game progresses, the character's personal demeanor and appearance start to wear down. You're introduced to more horrific imagery, and you start to second guess yourself if what you're doing is right, who's really the bad guy here, and if you can even trust your own sanity. Now, before I go any further, I do want to clarify something before I give you the same misconception I had when I first played this game. This game's main objective is not to be an anti-war game. Now, don't get me wrong, this game does bring up many worthy topics of discussion most games don't even cover, from soldiers' mental health, PTSD, should the US be getting involved with foreign conflicts, how much of your ethics should you abandon for the sake of survival, and that blurred line or people's different perceptions of right and wrong. However, while I love that this game isn't afraid to tackle these subjects, there are other parts of this game that don't work if you simply just look at this game as an anti-war game. Throughout the game, you're able to make some difficult choices, but regardless of what you choose, the results usually don't end up good. In fact, some of the more iconic and horrifying things that happen in this game, you don't have any choice in whether they happen or not. This is why the game doesn't fully work as an anti-war game, because since your hand is forced a lot of times, it can make the game feel more emotionally manipulative.
You've seen what this shit does. You know we
Might not have a choice, Lugo.
There's always a choice.
No, there's really not.
But this was never the game's true intent, because the truth of the matter is, despite what you think, you do have a choice whether or not these events happen. You just have to stop playing the game.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Think about it. Your original mission was to just report if there were survivors. Lugo and Adams constantly suggest that we should turn back. You were always given a choice to stop these atrocities by just stop playing.
You were never meant to come here.
We have our orders. Leave the city, radio command from outside the storm wall. They send in the cavalry, we go home.
What happened here was out of my control.
Was it? None of this would have happened if you just stopped. But on you marched. And for what?
We tried to save you.
You're no savior. Your talents lie elsewhere.
To cut to the chase, the real purpose of this game was to comment on how violence in military games had become so exaggerated that players have basically become numb to it and don't really think about their actions and just let the game puppet them around. Heck, this doesn't even have to apply to just military shooters. A lot of times, if a game gives us an objective and tells us to do it, we don't question it and just do it. Sometimes games might stop you from, say, shooting allies or civilians too much, but besides that, if you're gunning down the bad guys, you don't really have to worry about how many buildings you're destroying or the consequences of your actions. I mean, for example, look at the AC-130 sections from COD games. The first time they did this, it was actually kinda cool because it didn't just resemble real-life AC-130 monitor footage, but it also had a bigger emphasis on being cautious about which people or buildings you fired upon. But now when they do an AC-130 mission, it's just for filler, where you get 5 minutes of power fantasy as you level whole cities, taking out countless enemies. I mean, in Modern Warfare 3, not that one, the good one, you literally destroy the Eiffel Tower to take out a few enemies, and they play heroic music like you didn't just destroy one of France's most treasured monuments. I mean, it's literally like a scene in Team America, which was a parody of this stuff.
Damn, I missed him!
Meanwhile, in Spec Ops, they have their own take on that type of mission, but in this game, you hear nothing but the screen cranking and enemies screaming as you lay down fire upon them. You can see Walker's emotionless face on the screen as he deletes people on screen, and when you're done, the game will force you to walk through the wreckage, and it truly will make you feel like crap for doing it. It's definitely one of the more infamous parts of the game, and arguably the point when the game goes from a standard shooter to almost a psychological horror. Spec Ops The Line's true intent is to shine the spotlight on the player and ask them, do you feel anything about what you've done? Do you think Delta is in the right? Or is this just what the game's trying to tell you?
Do you feel like a hero yet?
In a lot of military games, we usually don't question fighting enemies because, besides for the obvious fact that they're technically not real people and just characters in a video game, they are still technically trying to kill us. If we don't fight back, we usually die, so we kill them in self-defense. And in the story, that's how they justify their actions, is it's self-defense. So in Spec Ops, when you get into firefights with these groups, you tell yourself that, oh, we didn't have a choice. But as you keep pushing forward and start doing more drastic things both to survive and to keep on mission, you start to wonder if the mission is worth it or if we should just leave. But our main character, Walker, who's voiced incredibly by Nolan North, keeps deflecting blame and coping, saying things like, we gotta keep moving, this isn't our fault, and I'm not leaving these people to die. But we, as the players, start to question Walker, but in reality, Walker reflects the player, and him saying that stuff is the game's way of tricking us into thinking, oh, it's not our fault we might have committed war crimes. We didn't know any better. They pushed us to do that. We had to do that to survive, and we gotta keep pushing forward for the sake of saving everyone. And as the players, we're gonna play the whole experience, not just because we didn't buy this game just to not play it, but also because with all the bad stuff that's happened, we want to get to the end just to see how the story resolves itself. After all, even in stories where a lot of bad stuff happens, usually there's gotta be a happy ending, right? So you keep going, you keep pushing through, and the deeper into this game you get, the more the game descends into madness. Your squad mates start to question your actions and turn on you, civilians start to hate the sight of you, hell, even the loading screens go from giving you in-game hints to just mocking you, and by the time you reach the end, you yourself start to doubt Walker. While I don't want to spoil the ending in case anyone who hasn't played is still watching, what I will say is there is a revelation that happens in the end that will blow your mind. The game has 4 different endings, and all 4 will probably make you feel like shit and not that happy ever after you wanted. What you will get, however, is a memorable and mature story that'll stick with you for years, and there are so many factors to why this story works so well. While the gameplay might be standard or average, the plot is a masterclass in writing. The story does a phenomenal job slowly and subtly playing out without over-explaining to the player what's happening until the very end when it hits you like a truck. And this is easily one of the most quotable games I've seen, and I love seeing people quote this game constantly in the chat while people play this game on stream.
It takes a strong man to deny what's in front of him.
The main characters also help make the story great as they're well written and voice acted, especially Nolan North, who gives a fantastic performance as Walker and has gone on record saying that Walker is one of his all-time favorite roles, and considering how many characters this guy has voiced in general is pretty high praise. I mean, the guy voices Nathan Drake, for God's sake.
Subway, where winners eat. Ow.
Another aspect that helps the story is its levels and setting. While the environments were marketed more so to enhance the gameplay experience, where they truly enhance the game is with environmental storytelling. There are so many detailed locations, plenty of graffiti, artwork, or symbolic imagery that reflects the game's darker tone and deeper meanings. It just has a lot of symbolism in general, from the main menu changing based on what mission you're on, to the stop sign in the beginning of the game symbolizing how you should stop, only for it to reappear halfway into the game, oh shot up and ruined, to even the soundtrack starting off with your cool and typical guitar riffs, but eventually as the game gets more crazy, the soundtrack starts to reflect that. The more you analyze this game, the more interpretations or deeper meanings you'll find within it. So, it's no surprise that even after 12 years, this game has spawned more video essays, discussions, and interpretations than any other game I've seen. Some of the stuff I've mentioned here, but there are so many other crazy theories that I haven't even touched on. Like one where Walker's our slave, forced to play the protagonist role on loop, or Walker is secretly already dead and stuck reliving his final memories in limbo or hell, which is totally insane, but not completely without any convincing evidence.
Wait, this isn't right!
Well, it's too late now!
No, I mean, we did this already!
What do you mean?
Fuck it! Nothing! Just shake these fucking guys!
Regardless of your interpretation, Spec Ops stands out from many of those other shooters because instead of just being a mindless shooter, it chose to tell a more mature story that both satirizes and goes against conventional tropes. Instead of being made solely for entertainment, it made some big statements about the genre, players' reactions with media, and even some real-world issues. And while I'm sure Spec Ops wasn't the first game to do this, you can feel its influence since its release. We've seen more games take these subject matters and either choose to reflect it in less glamorized and more mature and realistic ways, or to tell stories in a less black and white fashion and have players make more difficult choices that have consequences. You could even argue it helped inspire games like Stanley Parable, for example, that has you go against the game narrator and what they're trying to tell you to do and challenge who's really in control. Even Call of Duty tried to take the series into a more mature direction with its Modern Warfare reboot, which started strong, but eventually they couldn't keep themselves from drowning the games in stupid shit again. Don't get me wrong, as someone who loved this era of video games and just dumb, fun 80s action movies in general, let me be the first to say there's nothing wrong with still enjoying a mindless fun shooter like Call of Duty or Battlefield for that adrenaline rush, power fantasy, or hero story. Not everyone is going to click with this game because not everyone is open to the idea of playing a game that makes you feel bad or getting emotionally invested into a narrative. But during that time, we were getting so many of these games that we were starting to get tired of them. As they tried to upstage each other with how many explosions, turret chopper sequences, or America fuck yeah moments they could fit, they were starting to lose focus on how they should adapt their subject matter. War might be fun for games and movies, but real life war sucks, and even now, there are many horrible conflicts going on with no end in sight, so it's nice to see a game like Spec Ops pay more attention to that side of this topic instead of just focusing on action. Ironically, the game that most judged by its cover as another generic military propaganda game turned out to be one of the most innovative and redefining games of its generation. Even when I first tried it out, I'd already played games that made me recognize gaming as a great form of entertainment, but Spec Ops was the first game to show me that games could be more than just entertaining. Like other media, they could be art that can have creative symbolism, make relevant statements, and spark deep discussion. And while the industry has been branching out and giving us more creative experiences, I've seen very few that felt as well crafted and timeless as this 12-year-old classic.
This is Captain Martin Walker, requesting immediate evacuation of Dubai. Survivors. One too many.